All. We are so thrilled to have you here for our discussion with Susan Hubbard, an instructor in our writing studio, on the craft of story elements of disorder. My name is Seth Green, and on a morning like this one, I'm especially grateful to say I'm the Dean of the Graham School here at the University of Chicago. And let me welcome you to our campus, which had snow. It's a little bit greener now, but we expect more of that white snow in the next few days. So you can see our winter wonderland, and this is the place where the big ideas that we talk about in these discussions emerge from. For those who are interested, I do want to remind you that we are currently in winter course registration, and one of those courses will be previewed momentarily that we're particularly excited about. You have until December 27th to sign up, and we will put in the chat the link for those who want to do so. We also have many upcoming discussions. We will have a basic program info session later this week, as well as our first Friday lecture on desire in Plato's Meno. We also have a really interesting discussion with neuroscientist Daniel Levitin on the power and potential of our lives. And let me also extend an invitation to all of you to our upcoming holiday party. We are really excited to have several hundred Graham School students who will be coming together at the Gleacher Center next Thursday from 5 to 7. And beforehand, you can hear about a book that was recently published by one of our own, basic program instructor Lynn Apnip. I'll be talking with her about her new book, From Tragedy to Apocalypse in American Literature. Since all of you probably love writing as you are here in this virtual room, that will be a chance to look into some really fascinating writers across American literature. And with that, I'll just mention that if you are at our holiday party, you will be part of celebrating two fabulous instructors who receive our Excellence in Innovation and Teaching Awards this year. They were nominated by peers like all of you who are students in the classroom and who really believe that they're outstanding instructors. The Dean Service Award will go to Fred Beitler, and the Innovation in Teaching Award will go to Austin Walker. With that, though, let me turn over to the reason you all are here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and now we see Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Seth.
We are very excited for our conversation with you. Susan Hubbard draws on a film background to apply innovative approaches to story, working with writers of fiction, creative nonfiction, and screenplays to enhance scene, structure, character, and story. Her credits include award-winning screenplays, short films, and a play, Thunder Snow. She holds an MFA in film and video from Columbia College Chicago. Susan, welcome. We're really excited for our conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, Seth.
So let me start, Susan. You have held many courses at the university, and this is one that you've put together in new ways. And so I wanted to start with the question of why you decided to offer this course.
Yeah, about a year ago, I was thinking about what I could offer for this coming year that would be relevant. What is on people's minds? What influences are impacting our daily existence? And I was very struck, even at that time, and perhaps more so now, about what a sort of topsy-turvy world I feel that we are living in. Sort of the old rules, traditions, ways of interacting, sources of authority, all that has been called into question so much that we don't know what to trust, who to trust. And this has enormous implications for us psychologically, emotionally, interpersonally, societally. And these are all forms of conflict, of course, that we can utilize in our writing to spark the writing and make it move forward, make it interesting. So the remarkable thing is that as I was thinking about this course over the last year, is that I started to notice that there were some very celebrated writers who were making hay off this very idea. And it sort of reaffirmed my feeling that this was incredibly relevant and that audiences were ready for this, and that it's another tool in our toolbox as writers to sort of integrate this and confront it in our writing in very innovative and even fun ways, even though the topic itself is very serious.
Can you talk a little bit about some of those writers? You mentioned that there are people that are playing with this idea of disorder. I
Yes.
mean, in my own mind, I'm immediately drawn to artists when I think of that concept, and I think of Guernica or others that came out, during the Second World War, as we lived through huge changes in the way that we thought about norms, and people were obviously trying to make sense of it all. But you're talking about people that are currently writing
Yes.
and that are able to bring this disorder into narrative form. And so, who are some of those authors, and how do they use writing techniques to get at this idea of disorder in their approach?
Yes. Yes. It's very fascinating because it varies a great deal. So I would like to concentrate on three particular authors in this course, and the goal is to sort of look at what they're doing, and so that it can spark us to think of creative ways in which we ourselves as writers can think about how to integrate this sort of dysfunction and disorder into our writing. So the first one, I think many people have heard of him. His name is Hernan Diaz. He's the 2023 Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction for his novel Trust. That is a fascinating novel, and if others have read it, I would love to hear your thoughts after our discussion during Q&A, since I myself have just recently finished it, and I'm still thinking about what it all adds up to. But the very innovative approach that he came up with was to take a set of facts that start first as a novel. So we first get this sort of novel about a financier living in the 1920s whose involvement actually impacted the 1907 financial crash and the 1929 financial crash that led to the Great Depression. This is the central character about whom the fictional novelist in the first part of Diaz's work talks about him and his life and his impact and his wife and all of this information, just as in a sort of straightforward novel form. It's about, I think it's a little over 200 pages or something like that. I could be maybe 160. And then in the novel, in the larger metafictional world of this novel, the second part of these same facts, addressing these same facts, is the financier's autobiography, in which he corrects the novelist, which has a very unflattering treatment of his life. And you're reading this sort of autobiography, it's by the person who is the subject of the first part of the book, but then you start to hit little barriers like more to be added later and expand on this idea. So we're in the raw version of this character's autobiography, his response to that unflattering novel about him. And then we get the third part and the third set of interpretations of these same events and information in the work of Ida Partenza, who was the typist called in to sort of ghostwrite the financier's autobiography. And we get her whole story, which of course puts a whole different spin again on the same information and events of these two previous narratives. And then the fourth narrative is the diary. So we have novel, autobiography, memoir, and diary about the same events. We get the diary of Mildred, who is the man's wife, and we learn shocking things about all of what we thought we believed before. And the irony is that even though as we progress through the novel, we feel more confident in the narrators because they feel more real to us based upon the way in which they present their stories. But yet our trust has been so eroded that we question if they themselves are not operating with an agenda. So that's the whole point of this particular book. It plays with genre and narrator, the narration, to sort of confront this idea of who owns the truth with these four competing narratives.
Well, and Susan, it sounds like it's very much for this moment, because if we think about how storytelling has changed in a social media environment, we've gone from a place where, especially when we're thinking about political leaders, celebrities, significant, visible people,
Yes.
we've gone from a place where there was an authority that told us the story. Here's Kennedy. Here's who this person is. Here's how they live. Here's what they've done, to a place where now everyone is a content creator. People that are more visible
Yeah.
have a million different lenses on them. And that has really led to a profound loss of trust, because people no longer know what to believe. And if we look back, the authority was not always telling us the truth. I mean, if we look back at some of the ways that people have been captured by journalism or media over time, right? But we didn't know any better, and there was one narrative. And now we're in a place where you have all these lenses, and it totally corrodes a sense of objective truth, because everyone has a different way of looking at it, sometimes at odds at a level that is quite substantial. And so it's fascinating to think about that book as an entry point to that conversation, and a way to look at it from the perspective of one story being told multiple different ways, and through a moment in time that we can all in some ways think about because of the other literature that's been written on that time period. So a fascinating example. I know you have two others from what you already previewed, so let's jump into those.
Yeah, sure. So, the name of Diaz's novel is Trust, which has two meanings, right? It's the financial instrument, and it's about the subject of trust, which is,
Right.
fascinating and very innovative, his whole approach. So the second one is very, very different, and it's by Ling Ma, last name M.A., and it's called Severance. And she is actually a somewhat recent University of Chicago undergraduate graduate. And she penned this novel, and it's set, I think she graduated in 2005. It came out in 2018. And the narrator of this whole book, which is told by one narrator, is a recent college graduate of Chinese American. She's a Chinese American, and she graduates from college and she goes to New York, and she experiences all of the sort of dislocation that one would normally feel in this new environment as a young person trying to find their way. And but then something occurs, and that is something called Shen fever. So there is a virus coming out of China called Shen fever. And what happens when you get Shen fever is that you mindlessly repeat the same tasks over and over until you die. So there's a very strong critique of capitalism, our work ethic, all manner of things going on. But there are also elements of the supernatural and horror in this, because actually you have a pandemic. What's amazing about this novel and makes it incredibly innovative to me and very accessible is that it alternates between her life in New York before the fever hits and then after the fever hits, when she's among a small band of survivors. And what you find in the after pandemic mode, when most of the population has died, is that the dysfunction that you see there echoes all of the previous dysfunction that we have in our normal lives. So this, our insistence on brands, our insistence on consumerism, our values, our nostalgia for better times. And nostalgia is actually, in a very kind of clever little twist by Ling Ma, the author, nostalgia it actually makes a person succumb to Shen fever. So there's a whole critique about everything that we see on the internet, for instance, which is shaping all these realities and shaping our values. It's already past. it's once it's on the internet, it's past, and these things are preventing us from going forward into our futures. And that's just a one angle that she really addresses. The other one is, her sense of identity as a Chinese American immigrant, she was an immigrant. And there's also this sense um, of trying to find your way in a society that forces upon us a certain amount of routine that we come to depend on. So
Mm.
the whole critique of we are not living in the present. We are numbing ourselves with technology and consumerism and work. It's just really very, very easy to get into this story, and you feel really close to this one particular narrator all the way through. And when you read her book, the amount of critique of the things that we take for granted as important in our society are just over and over again undermined and shown to be sort of the hollow things that they are. The
And
thing,
give us an
yeah.
example of that. I think I get the big picture, but is there an example that comes to mind where she is critiquing the mundane capitalism that we engage in?
Over and over, even as the world falls apart all around her, her primary relationship breaks up, people around her are dying. She's the only one left in her office. Over and over again, she starts a new chapter with, I get up, I go to work.
Right.
And she reinforces the patterns that are comforting to her in her office. She ends up living in a high rise in New York because everything else is dysfunctional out in the world, and she hoards the food and so on. So just the fact of chaos is happening around you, everyone is leaving, but the main character finds solace in her routine, and also to prove to her immigrant parents that she will fulfill her contract, darn it, no matter what, and that she will be a success, even though those values are no longer relevant in the world in which finds herself.
Hmm. Well, and you have a third book you're going to be engaging. And so do you want to talk about the Cherry Robbers?
Oh, yes, The Cherry Robbers. This is sort of an outlier. It's kind of an outlaw book. So let's see, how can I describe this book? It starts out in 1950s in Pennsylvania, I believe. And the main character is an heir to a gun manufacturing fortune. There are six sisters in this book, and there is a curse amongst these sisters that as soon as they marry and lose their virginity on their wedding night, they die. So that's the premise. And it's kind of the mother is trying to prevent these girls from getting married because she fears that they will all die. So there's this supernatural gothic element, there's a curse element, and it sort of goes back to as far back as sort of Henry James with Turn of the Screw and this whole notion of female hysteria, which has a lot to do with the fact that these women don't have voices in society, that they are responding in a way that demonstrates that they have very little agency in society. And so it's a way of talking about their lack of agency, but also in the fact that they may be right. There actually is a ghostly presence living in the tower, right? So here we are using these aspects of speculative fiction, including the Gothic, for instance, horror and things, genres of this nature, as ways in to create audience interest because there's a mystery there. Is this really a curse? Is this last narrator going to be able to escape it? And it creates all this tension. So there's actually a way of following the story that plays homage to these genres, but has a very modern resolution in the way that this person ends up, how she ends up later in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with her life, because I don't want to have a spoiler, but she does things to sort of circumvent the curse through her own agency. It's very interesting.
Well,
All of these novels have in common sort of one thing, which is they are all rife with the four elements of conflict: character versus character, character versus self, character versus society, and character versus the supernatural or technological. The same the same environment of conflict that we find ourselves living in. We ourselves are living these very dramatic forms of conflict.
we're going to come to the questions that are starting to populate the chat, and let me invite others to put in your questions. I have one final one, Susan, before turning over to our audience, which is you have three very significant books. You have a few other things you're hoping to do in the course. Can you just talk through how you're going to teach this from both a kind of what's on the syllabus perspective in addition to these three, and then how do you go through them and how do you construct class to be able to really deeply read these texts and then reflect on the writing elements?
Well, because this is a writing class and our whole goal here is to get into our own writing as soon as possible, we're going to just touch on sort of trust and the cherry robbers, but Ling Ma's Severance, which is written in a way that is very normal to us as writers, where we write about a life in a present day. That's the one I'm going to have as our required text that we read and delve more deeply into. So the whole point is just to sort of see what are the possibilities that are out there as writers. And then we will all be writing, of course. All my courses are workshop classes, and everyone will get their workshop twice during the class. So there'll be a class session that'll be devoted to your work, and some of your classmates will workshop it in class. And on a week when you're not workshopping, you can still submit sort of shorter optional pieces, and I will give feedback on that. And the class is great. The classes that come and join up again and again, and hello to all of you. You guys are great at giving feedback too. So there's a lot of feedback on your writing, and the focus is on writing with these authors as inspiration to challenge us to figure out how we can do our own thing with this sense of disorder that we find ourselves living in.
We have our first question in the chat, which is about screenwriting, Susan, which I know that you have done. And it's how can screenwriters who present controversial topics being explored in feature films or TV pilots navigate a Hollywood industry who is concerned about profit and selling half their viewership and want to avoid risking losing that audience to provide material? I mean, do you just want to talk about maybe the challenges that writing may be under in this moment from a screenwriting and other perspective, and the opportunities presented?
Well, the opportunities are that you can actually be controversial. A lot of films are controversial that are out there today, and they're the award-winning films, and especially on television. Actually, the more controversial you are, it seems like the greater your following. So, I mean, it is a challenging time for writers now, just because of the way Hollywood is structured and how it's constantly seeking to, raise their profit margins. But I actually don't see controversy as I see it as not a problem in Hollywood. So whoever is asking that question, please write to me and tell me a little bit more about what you mean so that I can give you maybe a little bit more precise answer.
We have another question. How can we introduce conflict in controversial topics within the genre of flash fiction?
Flash fiction is also lends itself very well to these topics. The challenge with flash fiction is that you always have to introduce that really dramatic, off-putting element right away. And that's always the challenge. You don't have a lot of time to spool it out. But again, these are really wonderful, provocative questions, and I would really welcome people to write to me directly and ask me so I can give this more thought. And actually, I'd like to hear from some of the other folks that are out there that may have answers as well, because I'm sure there are answers out there among our audience.
Can you talk a little bit about how you think writing about disorder can help us to make sense of everyday life in a time of great technological and societal change. Because it strikes me that when we come to a book like Trust,
Yes.
it begins to help us understand our world. And through that experience of reading these four, you begin to realize why we've had this huge loss of trust in institutions and in narratives, and why, in many ways, we are in a society where there is great polarization with people really seeing different stories in the same moments. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how this genre of writing might help us to engage and maybe empathize
Mhm.
with modern day realities in a different and deep way.
Yeah, I think particularly with trust, as I said, you're reading a novel and it's proceeding straightforward and you're buying absolutely everything that's on the page, right? Because you know that this is the writer and you trust the writer. This writer's in control of their material. Diaz writes very fluently, right? It's very, very smooth. So it's only when you get into the other renditions, which are less smooth or more personal, that you start to see that the smooth explanation that's out there is not telling you the whole story. This is an experiential process as a reader. As you read, these questions start to spark up in your mind till and as I said before, by the time you get to the end, so the first two narrators are male, the last two are female, and the women's uh, renditions are more personal. They draw you in more, but by the end, your trust is already so eroded, and you're already asking so many questions about what's real here, is that you don't even trust them. So it's a perfect example of how just hearing the competing narratives makes you not trust anyone. And when you read a book like this, you actually go through the process in a very short amount of time that we all have been experiencing about, well, I can't believe that because it was reported by this news outlet, for instance.
Well, so I do want to read a comment here in the chat from Ricky Linksman, who says, I would just like to share with the group what a wonderful instructor Susan Hubbard is. I took 5 courses with her, and she helped me complete 3 feature film scripts. So I owe much gratitude to her. Anyone who has never taken a class with her is in for a great experience. There are then 6 people that have loved that comment. So
Great.
I echo it. So I'll be a 7th here in real time. We have a question from Amber. Can you talk a bit more about how the class will approach the writing component? Will the assignments be structured by topic and theme or just based on length?
Actually, I have a very open system, which is that you can come in with your idea at any level of development. And I just ask that you just write something every week. And you're going to work on the workshop pieces. They will be a little bit more polished. You'll probably start working on them sooner. But I have had writers come in with little but sketches, even just character sketches and so on. So you should come in. Ideally, you will come in with some idea. And if you don't have an idea, then you can talk with me. We'll help you develop something based on your concerns. And then I just like to see writers just attack their subject and write freely. We're in a critical mode in terms of helping everybody see what's working, what's not working, where we might want to see more. But this is a time for experimentation, and it's an opportunity among a really supportive group of people, very well read, with lots of experience in reading each other's work, to give you feedback on your ideas wherever they are and your execution of those ideas.
Susan, the books that you mentioned, some of them seemed very personal. So Severance, it
Yes.
sounds like that, even though it's fiction, maybe based on someone's life experience. Others, Trust, for example, I'm doubting that's directly lived experience unless this person doubles as a writer and a financier. And so, can you talk a little bit about how you think writers balance the personal experience of disorder with these broader societal themes? And especially when these are very emotional and traumatic moments for some individuals, how you think about bringing aspects of that or not
Mhm.
into your writing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think we all of our preoccupations always show up in our writing. And I think especially when we're sort of newer to the game, we are using our own experience directly in our writing. It's it's sort of impossible not to. And especially, I think it's actually a good idea to or it's a benefit, it's productive to do this simply because we understand something about our topic and it gets us going and it gets us started. And as we progress in our writing journey, we start to see from those early attempts how we can utilize the other tools at our disposal to advance our writing. And there are a great number of tools that we can use that we hit every single class. You know, structure is incredibly important. Where should things fall to make a compelling narrative? Just knowing what the standards are helps us to organize our material. But the advantage is there's always a great advantage in having an emotional attachment to your subject, at least to the degree that you can infuse a character with those same emotions, or also because if you feel strongly about something, now you're getting into the area of theme. And this is one of the reasons why we write, right? Because we have very strong views about living and we want to convey those. We want to persuade our audiences of our point of view. And so theme always gets, there's almost always an emotional component to theme. What we believe is underpinned by emotions, understanding the interplay between what our stories mean, what the themes are, what the meaning statements are, is one of the things that I think we can really explore in the class. And that's why I say, let's start off with what your preoccupations are, what you're thinking about writing, what interests you. And as we have that discussion, we find out, you help to discover what your feelings are about this and what you want to say about them. Otherwise, why are you writing, right? You are writing in order to persuade someone of some deeply held beliefs. You can certainly see that in all of our authors that we talked about today. They are very invested in the meaning statements that emerge from their books.
You talked a little bit about this, Susan, but I know community and workshopping is core to your model. And I've heard students in your class, and I read already how much they love you, but I've also heard they love one another and the value that they get from peers. How do you think that that comes into a class like this one, where, you're talking about something that is deeply personal in many ways, and where you're looking maybe from different perspectives at this issue of disorder. Can you talk a little bit about that workshop piece of
Yeah, sure. The workshopping is fascinating because, the basic, when you read someone else's work, the basic response is, this is really working for me, or I have questions about this. The other thing that can be very, very helpful is that people bring their own experience in, specifically in regard to this aspect of disorder. We are all experiencing disorder. So if people are writing about this or integrating it into their writing, you're going to get a multitude of perspectives on the disorder that the other person is writing about and is feeling really challenged by. Lots of people will say, "Oh, I had this happen in my life," or "I have the same experience." Just that it's really a very organic sort of response to the writing. It's not just in the execution, it's what are you talking about? And does it speak to me? So I think this Elements of Disorder is particularly lends itself really well to a very collaborative, very close-knit group of writers, really sort of taking each other's writers super seriously and caring about it.
We have another question in the chat. You found 3 novels that represent this theme for your new course, and I know there are others as well. Are there any movies or TV series that you think are good examples of this theme?
I haven't really quite gotten to that yet. I normally in my classes have use both a screenplay and a novel as models for what I want to talk about. But since having read the novels, my understanding of the topic has really evolved. Before this, I was sort of thinking about movies like Parasite, right? Or Everything Everywhere All at Once was another one. Those are just a couple that come to mind. TV series, I would have to think about that. I'm sort of locked into my own series, and I'm not sure I'm getting the best examples out there. But if you look at something like Breaking Bad or The Sopranos, I mean, these are early examples, but they really show and demonstrate already how society's sort of underpinnings are all falling apart and fragmenting, and people are doing what they do need to do to get by. Um, there are many examples out there. I have to think a little bit more about this question as well. It's a great question.
Doug asked, just to clarify, is Severance the only book that will be read from start to finish during the course?
Yes, yes, Doug. Doug's in my class, so I
Right.
see Doug all the time.
Paxton Murphy asks, what's the best way to develop one's own voice? So how do you think about that question? I know that's something that you teach on as well, is really developing, the one thing that you have differentiated from everyone else, which is, your own voice. How do you think about developing that, bringing that to light, bringing that onto the page?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think we have to we're influenced by other writers, but we don't want to speak or write like other writers. We want to have our particular voice. I think it might help to start with a memoir, actually, a personal experience, and you could do it as a flash fiction. You could think about what are some experiences that I've had in my life that have been traumatic or enlightening, or they changed my life in some way. And you could start writing about those experiences. And we all express ourselves differently when we're talking. We all have our little catchphrases, and there's a difference between sort of casual speech and written speech. But when you're writing sort of a memoir, you can bring that voice, your natural voice, the way you might describe it to a friend. That's another thing you can do. Who is the audience that you're telling this to? Is it a friend? Is it a peer? Is it a person of authority? Is it somebody that you need to bamboozle with your point of view and convince them that, hey, this was an injustice to me. I was wronged. So again, I think that's like a great way to start. Just start with those really transformative experiences and just start generating material about them.
We have a question, which I think I know the answer to. Do you have a classics background? And I know you have an MFA. I don't believe you have that classics. Can you talk a little bit, though, about how your background and experiences inform your role as an instructor in these classes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have an MFA in film from Columbia College here in Chicago. I'm a movie junkie from way back. I did take classes at the U of C in fiction and in film criticism. The thing about film is that it's a very compressed form. There's no room for dallying, if you will. And, as a novelist, you have much more freedom of expression, which works to your advantage. But when it's unfolding on the screen, audiences get very restive. Things have got to happen. So action is very, very important, but there also still has to be an emotional component. One of the great strengths of film writing is that it's very, very structured. There's a midpoint, there's an act structure, there's a crisis climax, there's a couple of other really key places. And if you know about these, you can use this as an underpinning. You've got all this material, like, right? Where am I going to put certain scenes? And I can assure you that somebody like Ling Ma with her novel Severance did this. She had all these chapters. She had chapters about the pre-pandemic Shen fever and the post-pandemic, and they are interspersed, but they're not interspersed in this one off, one off, one off. They're interspersed where they can give the most impact to the story, right? And so film is an invaluable tool for understanding structure. It's an invaluable tool for understanding dialogue and the basics of dialogue.
Well, so we are nearly out of time. I'll read one more comment because it is also very true to the love that our students have for you, Susan. Susan has the unique ability to meet each writer where they are and offer feedback in a way that inspires you rather than depresses you toward action. My book is at least 10 times better from my time in Susan's class. I will sign up for any writing class she is teaching. Can you just talk about your experience in this, being an instructor in the writer's studio, seeing incredible students who then bring their vision for storytelling to life. What has that meant to you?
Oh, I'm getting emotional here because I have to say that I started this. Someone told me, "Oh, you know all this about screenwriting. Go teach screenwriting." Well, I never realized how transformative teaching would be for me as a person. Not only in terms of the solidarity of trying to do something rather difficult and solitary normally with a group of like-minded people, but also the brilliance of the writers that I work with. How much I have learned from them over the course of years that has refined my understanding of writing, that has challenged me in ways that I never thought I would be challenged. It's really been a marvelous experience, and I've learned so much from the writers that I've worked with. It's been tremendously, wonderfully a conversation on in the best sense of that word.
Well, it's been a joy talking with you about these books. We are in a time of immense change, and so the concept of disorder feels very relevant. And the idea that writers can capture that and use narrative to bring people into that experience and people can walk away with a deeper understanding feels very core to what we should be involved in at the University of Chicago. So thank you, Susan, for bringing that course to us here and to our learners, and for the many people, and the chat is full of them, that you have positively influenced in their writing journeys. And thank you all for joining us. You saw in the chat, and you'll receive a follow-up email with information should you want to register and be part of this course and read some incredibly compelling and engaging books, as well as writing, so that you can develop your own voice in the process. Thank you all and have a great morning. And for those in the East Coast, a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank
Seth.
you, Susan. Good to see you.